I had been a park ranger for almost 10 years. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was real. Kept me outside, surrounded by nature, and I liked the peace and quiet. Most of the time, the job was straightforward. Patrolling, keeping an eye out for illegal activity, managing the wildlife, and talking to the visitors. It wasn't until that one shift, a late-night patrol, that I'd realized how thin the line is between a peaceful life in the woods and something far darker. It was a cold night in early October. I'd been assigned to the northern part of the park, a vast stretch of forest far from the main entrance. The trees were bare, the leaves scattered across the road, and the air had a bite to it that made every breath feel sharp. The park was mostly empty at this time of year, with only a handful of campers scattered across the far side. It was one of those nights where the silence in the woods felt too loud, like the wind itself was holding its breath. I was driving along a dirt road, the headlights of my patrol truck slicing through the dark. I knew this stretch of the park well, probably better than I knew the back of my hand. The park was huge, but the northern part felt like the heart of it, the wildest part. The road wound through dense pines, and it wasn't uncommon for animals to cross at night. I was keeping an eye out for anything out of place, like fallen branches or signs of poaching, when I saw something strange. It was about 2 in the morning. I had just finished my usual check of the eastern trailhead and was heading back when I noticed a figure standing off the side of the road. It was too far away to make out at first, just a silhouette. At first, I thought it might be someone in trouble. Maybe a hiker who got lost or someone who'd broken down. I slowed down as I approached, pulling over to the side of the road. The figure didn't move, just stood there, unmoving. It wasn't until I was closer that I realized something was wrong. It wasn't a person at all. It was too tall, unnaturally tall. The shape was wrong, too, like a person but stretched out, distorted. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe it was an optical illusion, a trick of the shadows from the trees. But as I stared, I could see the figure more clearly. It didn't have the usual outline of a person. Its arms hung low, too long. Its head was tilted unnaturally to one side. It looked like it was waiting for something, and for a moment, I had the strange, unshakable feeling that it was waiting for me. I grabbed the radio, but it didn't feel like enough. I reached for the flashlight on the dashboard and flicked it on, aiming it toward the figure. The light cut through the dark, but as it hit the figure, it didn't seem to faze it at all. The light shone directly on it, but it didn't react. No flinching, no turning away. It was like it was part of the night itself. I don't know why, but I decided to drive closer. My hand tightened around the steering wheel, the truck's engine humming low in the night. The figure still didn't move, still didn't react. I was almost right on top of it when I saw the detail that made my stomach drop. The skin was wrong. It wasn't the smooth texture you'd expect. It was rough, almost like bark, the kind of texture you'd find on a weathered tree. It wasn't human skin, I was sure of it. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. But the closer I got, the more details started to make themselves clear. I slammed my foot on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt just a few feet away from the figure. My eyes were glued to it now, and I could see that its face, if you could even call it that, was mostly featureless, like a blank mask. It had no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just an empty face, staring straight ahead. In that moment, I made the decision to get the hell out of there. I threw the truck into reverse, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the gear shift. I could hear my own breath, shallow and fast, filling the silence as I backed away from the thing. My headlights illuminated the road behind me, but I didn't dare take my eyes off the figure. I didn't look back until I was a good distance down the road, and even then, I still felt its presence. The rest of the night was a blur. I made my rounds, patrolled the western loop, but I couldn't shake the image of that thing from my mind. It felt like it had followed me somehow, its presence lingering in the trees, just beyond my sight. Every time I passed a dark patch of woods, I couldn't help but feel its eyes on me, even though I knew there was nothing there. By the time I made it back to the ranger station, the sun was just starting to creep over the horizon. I was exhausted both mentally and physically. The night had taken everything out of me. I sat in the parking lot for a moment, just staring at the ground, trying to make sense of what had happened. My radio crackled to life, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Ranger, you copy?" It was the shift supervisor, and he sounded concerned. He never called me this late unless something was wrong. "Yeah, I copy. What's up?" I replied, my voice hoarse. "We got a call about an abandoned car near the north entrance. The vehicle's unmarked, and there's no one around. Are you familiar with that area?" I froze. The north entrance wasn't far from where I had seen the figure earlier. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. "I'm familiar. I'll go check it out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to go back there. I didn't want to see that thing again. But duty called, and I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my gear, checked my rifle, and drove back toward the north entrance. The morning light had begun to cast long shadows across the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread in my chest. It was like I was being pulled back to that spot, like I was being drawn toward whatever that thing had been. When I reached the north entrance, the car was exactly where they said it would be. An old sedan, its windows tinted dark. There were no tracks around it, no sign of anyone who had walked away. I got out of the truck and approached cautiously, my boots crunching in the gravel. I checked the area, but everything was silent. No animals, no birds, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees. I opened the car door, half expecting to find something inside, but the seat was empty. The vehicle was completely abandoned. There was nothing out of the ordinary except for one thing: a single deep scratch on the side of the car. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, like something had raked its claws down the metal. My heart pounded. I knew what I had to do next. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't keep going back to that place. I didn't want to know what was out there, but duty was duty. I radioed in my report, told them I'd continue searching the area. I knew the woods around here. I knew how quickly things could turn from normal to dangerous. And that's when I heard it. A sound, faint at first, coming from the woods. A rustling. At first, I thought it might be an animal. But then the sound grew louder. A low, steady scraping, like something or someone dragging something heavy across the ground. My blood ran cold. I knew that sound. I had heard it earlier in the night when I'd seen the figure. The same scraping sound. I turned my head toward the woods, my hand tightening around the flashlight. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I stepped forward, heart hammering in my chest, and aimed the flashlight into the trees. The beam sliced through the underbrush, but I didn't see anything at first, just shadows. But then I caught a glimpse of movement. Something tall, something stretched out, just like before. It was standing there, half hidden in the trees, watching me. I froze. This time, I didn't hesitate. I ran back to my truck, jumped in, and slammed the door. I floored the accelerator, speeding out of there without looking back. My breath was ragged, my hands slick with sweat as I drove, my heart racing in my chest. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know what it wanted. But I do know one thing. It's still out there, somewhere waiting. And I'm never going back to that part of the park again. Not ever. I worked as a park ranger in a national reserve in the province formerly known as the Orange Free State, now a part of the Free State province in South Africa. The reserve was massive, hundreds of square kilometers of bushveld, rolling grasslands, and dense thickets. I was part of a small team of rangers tasked with protecting the land from poachers, particularly those targeting rhinos for their horns. It was a dangerous job, and most of the time, the danger came from the humans we were chasing. But sometimes there were other threats, unseen, unnerving, and far harder to explain. One particular night stands out, a night that still gives me chills when I think about it. I wasn't on the patrol alone, though. My team and I, a close-knit group, had spent hours on the road, scanning for anything out of place. As the sun set and the temperature began to drop, we all agreed it was time for a break. The summer heat in the bushveld is oppressive during the day, but the nights can cool off dramatically. Even though it was only a few hours past sunset, it felt like the temperature had dropped almost immediately. We parked the van on a dirt track, just off the road that wound through the reserve. The headlights were on, casting a pale glow into the dense bush on either side. We all climbed out and leaned against the vehicle, taking a breather. My buddy Martin pulled out a joint. He lit it, and we passed it around, quietly chatting, trying to relax. In a job like this, it was important to keep your wits sharp, but we had been out on patrol for hours, and the calm of the bushveld at night can make you feel like nothing is amiss. The smell of the earth was thick in the air, a combination of dust and grass, with a slight tang of something herbal from the joint. The only sounds were the distant calls of night birds and the occasional rustling in the bush as animals went about their business. Even though it was dark, we all felt safe here. We had gotten used to the rhythm of the land, the way it breathed. Nothing had ever come close to disturbing us before, but tonight was different. At first, it was subtle, a small shift in the atmosphere, almost unnoticeable. I didn't think much of it at first, but then one of the girls, Sarah, mentioned that the temperature seemed to have dropped suddenly. She asked if anyone had a jacket she could borrow. That's when I turned around to reach for the gear in the back of the van, and it hit me. Every hair on my body stood on end. The air felt thick, unnaturally still, and cold in a way that didn't belong out here. That's when I saw it. Standing just at the edge of the bush, barely within the range of the van's rear lights, was a figure. It wasn't any animal I had ever seen in all my years working in the reserve. It was tall, impossibly tall, well over 7 feet, I would say. Its body was long and thin, almost grotesquely so, like something that didn't belong in this world. It stood on 2 legs, but its posture was hunched, slightly tilted forward as if it were watching us with intent. The worst part? Its eyes. They were reflective, shining back at us like 2 bright, glowing embers. They caught the light from the van, and for a moment, I thought I was looking at the eyes of some massive predator. But no animal I knew had eyes like that. They weren't the eyes of a lion or even a hyena. They looked wrong, like they had no business being part of any living creature. And then there was its head. It was the most unsettling part. It wasn't shaped like any animal I'd ever seen, not like a lion or a jackal. The closest thing I could compare it to was a hyena, but its face was even more distorted, flatter, with sharp features that seemed to exaggerate its unnatural look. It was as though its face was twisted into something that shouldn't be possible in nature. I swear to God, I froze, couldn't breathe. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing, and I just stared at it, caught in its gaze. But I wasn't the only one. When I swore in shock, the others turned, and suddenly, we were all staring at the creature. I could see it now. Its body was gaunt, thin, almost skeletal, but still capable of an unnerving power. The bones under its skin seemed to stretch and flex as it moved ever so slightly. In that moment, the whole group went dead silent. It wasn't just the natural fear that came from seeing a predator. It was something else. A feeling of pure dread, an overwhelming sense of evil radiating from it. It wasn't just a thing of flesh and bone. It felt like something darker, something that didn't belong in this world at all. I've seen lions up close, even elephants, and I felt the fear that comes with knowing you're in the presence of something dangerous. But this was different. This wasn't just fear. This was something worse. It felt like we were in the presence of something that didn't belong in the natural order. Something ancient. The air around us grew thick, and it was hard to breathe, like the atmosphere itself was being suffocated by the creature's presence. The ground beneath my feet felt wrong, like I wasn't standing on earth anymore, but on something much darker. The creature took a step forward. That movement snapped me out of my paralysis. Adrenaline flooded my body, and the instinct to flee hit like a hammer. Couldn't think, I just acted. One of the others, Martin, I think, shouted in Afrikaans, "Re. It wasn't just a command to drive. It was the desperate, panicked plea of someone who knew that if we didn't leave, we wouldn't make it out alive. I slammed the door of the van open, and we all scrambled in. Martin jumped behind the wheel, and without wasting a second, he started the engine. The tires squealed on the gravel as he floored the accelerator, and we shot off down the dirt track, not daring to look back. We didn't stop until we were miles away, parked in the safety of the main camp, our hearts still pounding in our chests. We didn't speak for a long time. Nobody knew what to say. What could we say? None of us had ever seen anything like that before. The terror we felt that night was something primal, something deep, like it was reaching into our souls and twisting us from the inside out. For the rest of the night, we stayed awake, talking in hushed tones about what had happened. Some of us tried to rationalize it, as you do in these situations. Maybe it was a large, undiscovered animal, maybe a mutated creature. But deep down, we all knew that wasn't the case. Whatever we had seen that night, it wasn't from this world. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what we had encountered. It wasn't just the terror of the moment. It was the weight of what that creature represented. It felt like it wasn't just an animal or a monster. It felt like something ancient, something tied to the earth in ways that we couldn't comprehend. It wasn't a creature of flesh and bone. It was something deeper, something older. I started reading up on local myths and legends, hoping to find some explanation. I even started looking into things like the Egyptian god Anubis. The more I read, the more I found myself drawn to the idea that what we had seen wasn't just a random animal, but something inspired by ancient legends. It felt like it had come from a time when humans believed in gods, spirits, and creatures that were more than just stories. It made me wonder how many of these creatures might still be out there, hidden in the dark corners of the world. I still don't know what we saw that night. It's been years now, and I've never seen anything like it again. But the fear I felt then, that pure, cold dread, it's something I'll never forget. And whatever it was, I'm glad it didn't come closer. It's out there, waiting in the dark. We just happened to catch a glimpse of it. Sometimes, when I'm out there in the bush, I feel like I can still hear the rustling of the trees, the soft crunch of grass under something large, something moving just beyond the edge of the light. But I've learned not to look. You don't want to see what's out there. You really don't. I was about 10 years old when I went on a trip into the woods with my uncle. He worked as a park ranger, and I'd always loved spending time with him, especially in the forest. The trees seemed endless, and the air smelled like fresh pine and earth. It was always a peaceful feeling, being so deep in nature. We went on plenty of hikes, exploring hidden trails and camping under the stars. It was a safe place, a place where I felt connected to the world in a way that nothing else seemed to provide. This particular trip was in a forest in Germany, somewhere a few hours outside the city. It was a beautiful day, sunny but not too hot, with just enough of a breeze to keep the air cool. We were walking along a trail that my uncle said was a bit more remote than usual. Fewer people come through here, he told me as we headed off the main paths and into the denser woods. I didn't think much of it at the time. To me, all forests seemed the same. Quiet, peaceful, and full of mystery. I trusted my uncle. He'd been working as a ranger for a long time, and he knew the woods better than anyone. We'd been walking for about 3 hours, the sound of our boots crunching the fallen leaves breaking the silence. I was enjoying the hike, taking in the scenery, trying to spot animals in the trees, or catch a glimpse of any wildlife. The deeper we went into the forest, the quieter everything seemed to get. There was no chatter of birds or rustling of small animals. It was just the steady rhythm of our footsteps. Then something started to feel off. It was hard to put into words at first, but there was a shift in the air. The woods weren't just quiet. They were too quiet. I glanced at my uncle, but he seemed absorbed in something ahead of him, not noticing anything unusual. I didn't want to worry him, so I kept it to myself. At first, it was just a flicker, something in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving behind a tree, too fast to catch. I thought it was just my imagination, maybe a trick of the light. I focused on it for a few more seconds, but it was gone. The forest felt even quieter now. I tried to shake off the weird feeling, but it lingered. About 5 minutes later, I saw it again. This time, the shadow was clearer, almost as if someone was moving behind one of the larger trees. I couldn't see their face, but I saw the shape of a figure just standing there watching us. When I blinked, it was gone. My heart started to beat a little faster, but I still didn't say anything to my uncle. I figured it was just a deer or some other animal that I couldn't make out. But then it happened again. and again. More figures appeared, always just behind the trees, always just out of clear view. They didn't seem to move like any animal I knew. They didn't have the fluid motion of a deer or a fox. These figures just stood there, almost like they were waiting for us. The shadows were there, but they never fully came into focus, always staying just behind the trunks of trees, and as I looked toward them, they seemed to disappear. It was like they were playing a game, taunting me, showing up just enough to make me wonder if I was seeing things. By now, I was starting to feel dizzy. The air seemed heavier, and my legs felt weaker. I was struggling to keep up with my uncle, my eyes darting from one side of the trail to the other, trying to keep track of the shadows. I was starting to feel like something was wrong, but I still couldn't bring myself to say anything. I didn't want to look foolish, especially not to my uncle. But with each passing moment, I felt like I was more and more on edge. The shadows kept appearing, and they were starting to change. They weren't just random dark spots anymore. They were forming shapes, clearer now, with outlines that were starting to resemble people. The figures were becoming more humanoid, like something was standing there watching us. But every time I tried to look directly at one, it vanished, like it was just a trick of my mind. The dizziness was getting worse, and the forest around me felt like it was closing in. I stopped walking for a moment, trying to steady myself. My uncle, still not noticing anything wrong, kept moving ahead, but I couldn't keep up. I was frozen. My legs felt like lead, and the shadows felt too real now. I wasn't just imagining them anymore. I could see them clearly. People standing behind trees, their features hard to make out, but their presence undeniable. It wasn't just one or two shadows now. It was several, scattered along the trail, following us, and I was starting to feel like they were closing in. "Uncle?" I whispered, but my voice didn't seem to carry. He didn't hear me. I felt the blood rush to my head, my heart racing as I turned to look at the trees. The shadows were closer now, almost as if they were standing just on the other side of the trunks, just out of reach. They weren't just following us, they were moving with us. As we walked, they seemed to walk as well, always behind, always out of sight. Panic started to grip me. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I could feel the sweat starting to form on my skin, the air thick and suffocating. What was happening? Why couldn't I shake this feeling of dread? Were they watching us? It wasn't just the shadows anymore. The whole forest felt wrong. The trees felt too close, the path too narrow. I couldn't escape it, couldn't make sense of what I was seeing or feeling. My mind raced with thoughts. Maybe people had been here before, hiding in the woods. Maybe there were strange things going on out here that I didn't understand. I thought of things I had heard from my uncle, stories of people disappearing in the woods, of strange encounters, of things that couldn't be explained. My mind was spinning, and the dizziness was overwhelming now. I couldn't keep my eyes open, couldn't focus. For what felt like an eternity, I walked like this, surrounded by shadows that I couldn't escape, and with each step, they seemed to grow closer. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks. But the feeling in my gut told me it was something else, something darker, something I couldn't see. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the figure stopped. I was still dizzy, still feeling sick, but the shadows were gone. I couldn't see them anymore. The forest around me seemed to open up again, and the path ahead felt clearer, brighter. The oppressive feeling lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was able to breathe again. I caught up with my uncle, who didn't seem to have noticed anything strange at all. The hike continued without another word about the shadows. I was too scared to bring it up, too unsure of what had happened. Was I just imagining it all? Had I lost my mind in the heat of the moment? Or was there something else in that forest? Something I couldn't explain? We finally made our way out of the woods, the familiar sights of the town in the distance, and I started to feel my heart settle. The strange feeling, the shadows, the fear, all of it started to fade as the city came into view. The weight lifted from my chest. It was over. But even now, as I look back on that day, I can't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Something in those woods. Something that I wasn't meant to see. And though I never spoke of it to my uncle or anyone else, a part of me will always wonder, what were those shadows? And why did they disappear as soon as we left the heart of the forest? I wasn't a park or forest ranger, but I worked as a historical docent at Blennerhassett Island in Parkersburg, West Virginia. At the time, I was about 15 years old. If you've never heard of Blennerhassett Island, it's a small, secluded island tucked away in the Ohio River. The place is steeped in history, but also in mystery, and I had no idea just how strange things could get until I started working there. The island is named after the Blennerhassett family, who once lived there in the early 1800s. The family became infamous in American history because of their association with Aaron Burr. You know, the guy who killed Alexander Hamilton in that famous duel. Burr allegedly had plans to take over the US, and the Blennerhassetts were somehow involved. But that's not what scared me. The island is known for its strange happenings. Over the years, people have reported seeing all sorts of ghosts, especially those tied to the Blennerhassett family. Margaret, Harmon, and their daughter, who's often referred to as Baby Margaret. There are also reports of sightings of a Native American figure on the south tip of the island and a mysterious groundskeeper near the Putnam Hauser house. But the one most often seen is Margaret Blennerhassett herself, dressed in a flowing white gown. People say you can smell lilacs before you see her, but I'll get to that in a minute. I didn't think much of these stories at the time, but as I'll tell you, my perception of those old tales changed drastically that afternoon. Blennerhassett Island is a small, lush place. It's mostly visited by tourists who come to take a boat ride out to the island, walk around the grounds, and tour the historic mansion. It's a pretty typical historical site. I spent most of my days giving tours of the mansion and telling people about the island's fascinating history, how the Blennerhassett family had their home there, and how Aaron Burr came to visit and was eventually arrested for treason. It wasn't all that exciting, but I liked it. It gave me a sense of connection to history, something that made me feel grounded. That was, of course, until one day when I found myself staring into the unknown. It was the middle of the day, maybe around 2:30 p.m. Most of the tourists were either taking a break or enjoying the view by the river, so I had a little free time. I decided to head down toward a clump of trees near the edge of the island where there's a bench. It's a quiet spot, usually empty, where I could eat my lunch and clear my head. It was my favorite place to go when I needed a moment of peace. As I walked toward the trees, I was daydreaming, thinking about the things I had to do that evening when I saw something unusual. At first, it was just a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, something white. I assumed it was another docent, one of the older women who wore a white apron, walking to another part of the island. The docents were all dressed in period costumes, so it wasn't uncommon to see someone in white from time to time. But when I turned my head to look, I saw something I wasn't expecting. It wasn't a person in an apron, it was a woman, and she was wearing a long, flowing white gown. My heart skipped a beat. I knew the stories about Margaret Blennerhassett, how she had been seen walking the island in her white dress, how she was often accompanied by the scent of lilacs. But this wasn't dusk when people usually saw her. It was bright daylight. The woman was standing there, not moving, just staring ahead into the distance. Her gown billowed slightly in the breeze, as though she were part of the landscape. I stood there, frozen for a second, trying to figure out if what I was seeing was real. I wasn't sure if it was a trick of the light or if my mind was playing games with me. I took a step forward, but the woman didn't seem to notice. She didn't react at all. Her back was turned to me, so I could only see her from the back, her long, dark hair flowing down her back, the white gown trailing behind her. I took another step, but my feet felt heavy as though something was keeping me rooted in place. My mind raced. I thought about calling out to her, asking if she needed help, but I didn't. Something stopped me. Something about the way she stood there, so still, so perfect, like a painting. I couldn't explain it. It didn't feel right. As I watched her, I noticed something else. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The air around me started to feel colder. It wasn't a drastic change, but it was enough for me to notice. The wind had picked up a little, and I could hear the rustling of leaves in the trees behind me. Yet this woman, she wasn't reacting to it. She didn't seem to move at all. I took another step forward, and that's when it happened. I blinked, just once, but when I opened my eyes, she was gone, vanished, just like that. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Couldn't believe it. I looked around, expecting her to be somewhere nearby, maybe ducking behind a tree or walking toward the mansion. But no, there was no sign of her anywhere. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the spot where she had been, but eventually, I snapped out of my trance. My stomach turned, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what to think. Was I imagining things? Had I just seen a ghost? Or was I just tired and my mind playing tricks on me? I quickly turned around and made my way back to the group. I tried to shake off the strange feeling that had settled in my chest, but I couldn't. I needed to tell someone what had happened. As soon as I got back to the others, I blurted out what I had seen, expecting some kind of reassurance, some logical explanation. But the others just looked at me blankly. None of them seemed to believe me. "Oh, come on, you must have been seeing things," one of the other docents said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "That's Margaret's usual spot, but she only appears around dusk, and usually she's near the house. You've probably just been working too hard. You need a break." But I knew what I saw. I knew it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. There was no mistaking it. The woman in the white gown had been real, and the moment she vanished left me feeling more unsettled than I can ever put into words. I don't know if Margaret's spirit really haunts Blennerhassett Island, but that experience, seeing her in the middle of the day, out of place and out of time, made me believe in something that I couldn't explain. I never talked about it with anyone again, at least not in detail. I didn't want to sound crazy, especially when no one else seemed to believe me. But in my heart, I knew what I had seen, and to this day, I can still picture her standing there, so still and silent, just waiting for me to notice her. Even now, whenever I pass by Blennerhassett Island, I feel a strange pull in my chest. The stories are still there, lingering in the background, and I can't help but wonder if Margaret is still out there, wandering the grounds, waiting for someone else to see her too. It was the kind of morning that made you feel like the world was still quiet, still half asleep, like it was waiting for something to happen. I was heading into work, just another routine day at the National Forest. I've been a park ranger for a few years now, and mornings like this were familiar. The sun was barely up, just creeping over the ridge. The roads were still cool, still damp from the night's chill. I had a coffee cup in one hand, keeping one eye on the dirt road ahead of me, and the other on the trees that were just beginning to light up in the distance. The drive was long, but familiar. Out here, things never really changed. Same road, same trees, same bends in the road that felt like old friends. I had taken this stretch 100 times before, but today was different. I was coming around a curve when I saw it. A plume of smoke. At first, I thought it was just a campfire. Maybe someone out here having a morning fire before they packed up and headed back to town. But this wasn't just smoke. It was thick, dark, and rising fast. It was a lot more than a campfire, and I knew it. I hit the brakes and slowed down, squinting through the windshield. The smoke wasn't coming from the usual camping spots, or even from where the Park Service sometimes had controlled burns. This was different. There was something wrong. I could feel it in my gut, like that uneasiness that hits you when you know something's off but you can't quite put your finger on it. I rounded the corner, and that's when I saw it. Right there, in the middle of the road, a van. A big, ugly thing, a rusted-out old model. It was completely engulfed in flames. The smoke was so thick that it made the air heavy, like I was breathing in a storm. The tires were gone, melted into puddles of rubber that sizzled and popped with every second. I could feel the heat radiating off of it, even from the safety of my truck. I wasn't too close, but it was hot enough to make my skin feel prickly. I pulled over and just stared at it for a second, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. The road was narrow, a dirt path carved through the trees, and there was no way around this van. The flames were wild, licking at the sky, but I didn't see anyone around. No people, no signs of anyone trying to put it out. No movement at all. It was like the fire had just appeared, with no one to claim responsibility for it. I grabbed my radio, called in a report. "This is Ranger 2. Got a fire on the road, possible vehicle involved. I need a 911 response, immediate. I'm going to have to take a detour." I didn't think much of it at first. I figured someone had probably ditched the van. Maybe stolen, maybe abandoned, and lit it on fire. People did weird stuff out here sometimes. It wasn't unusual to find old vehicles abandoned in the middle of nowhere, but I never thought it would end like this. I stayed in my truck, keeping my distance, not sure what to do next. I was still shaking my head when I decided to take the long way around. I had to drive at least another half hour to get around the fire, which was a pain, but it didn't seem worth it to sit there and wait. The fire department would handle it when they got there. I kept driving, trying to shake the weird feeling I had in my stomach. It was one of those things that doesn't make sense until it's too late to change it. It was only later that I found out the rest of the story. The fire department had shown up, they had the whole place cleared out, and by then, the fire was mostly under control. They sent a team to check it out, and that's when they found the body. A man had been sitting in the driver's seat when it started. He'd been dead for a while before the fire took over, maybe hours. It didn't click at first, but when I got the call back later that day, they told me everything. The van hadn't been abandoned. The guy was still in there, just like I'd figured, but there was no sign of anyone else around. It wasn't a stolen vehicle either. No signs of forced entry, no signs that it had been tampered with. The man hadn't tried to run. There was no struggle. The doors were locked, and he hadn't made any attempt to get out. The fire was ruled an act of suicide. They found his ID, found out who he was. Some guy from a town about an hour away, a regular guy by all accounts. No major criminal record, no history of mental health issues that they could find. They went through his personal effects, his car, his phone, and everything seemed like it was just normal. But how? Why would anyone do something like that? Why would you choose a place like this, so far out in the middle of nowhere? It didn't make sense. There was nothing about the area that felt significant to him. No connection, no family here, no landmarks that would tie him to this specific spot. It bothered me, stuck with me. How did he end up here of all places? Was he just passing through, and something in his life had broken him in a way I couldn't understand? I tried to imagine how he could have sat there, in that van, without anyone knowing. He didn't scream for help, didn't honk the horn, didn't do anything that would have alerted anyone. Just sat there, let the fire consume him. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I drove down that stretch of road, I'd see the place where the van had been. I think about the guy in the seat, how he must have felt, what his last moments were like. The van was gone, of course, cleaned up by the time I went back through, but the memory of it haunted me. It was like there was something about it that didn't add up, something I was missing. Days passed. I kept doing my job, checking on the campgrounds, patrolling the forest, but I kept thinking about that fire. I talked to a few of the other rangers, trying to figure out what the hell had happened, but no one had any answers. The investigation didn't really go anywhere. It was just one of those things that didn't make sense, and maybe it never would. Then one day, I ran into one of the local deputies. We got to talking, and the subject of the fire came up. He told me that they'd looked deeper into the guy's background, but it wasn't like they could find much. His family was shocked, of course, but they didn't have any idea why he would have come out to that particular part of the forest. "You ever been out there?" he asked me, and I nodded. "Yeah, been down that road 100 times. Well, it's not the kind of place you'd go if you were looking to end things. You'd expect someone to be out in a quieter spot, something more secluded, you know?" I knew exactly what he meant. This was a main road. It wasn't busy, but it wasn't out in the middle of nowhere either. People used it to get to campgrounds, to hike, to head out towards some of the more remote parts of the park. "Yeah, but maybe that's why he did it there," I said. "Maybe he wanted to be found." The deputy gave me a long look, like he was trying to figure out if I was onto something or just talking to fill the silence. He didn't say much else, but I could tell he'd been thinking about it the same way I had. That place, it didn't make sense for a guy who was looking to end things. Eventually, the case was closed. It was a suicide. The fire had burned everything it could, and there wasn't anything left to investigate. They moved on to other things, other cases. But me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I drove past that stretch of road, I'd look for any sign, any clue that could make sense of it. But there was nothing, just a stretch of dirt road, some trees, and a place where a man's life ended in the strangest way. It wasn't about ghosts or some unfinished business from beyond the grave. It wasn't some unexplained mystery that couldn't be solved. It was just real life. Life that didn't make sense, that never made sense. Some things you just can't figure out no matter how hard you try. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. Not the things we can't explain, but the things we can't ever understand. It was around 10 p.m., one of those quiet, still nights that are so dark you can barely see the road in front of you. I was doing my usual rounds, driving the gravel roads in the park to lock up the gates. This is the part of the job most people would find boring. Just a lot of driving, checking gates, making sure the park is secure, and dealing with the occasional stray camper who hasn't realized that the park's closing time was hours ago. The gravel crunched under the tires of my truck as I made my way down one of the more remote roads, the ones nobody really drives on unless they have a good reason. The moon was barely a sliver in the sky, and the only light I had came from my headlights. It was peaceful but eerie in its own way, that kind of dead silence that fills the air when you're out alone in the wilderness at night. As I reached the last gate I needed to lock for the night, I made sure the chains were secure. I'd done this 100 times before, but something about tonight felt off, a bit heavier than usual. Maybe it was just the long hours, the quiet, or maybe I was just starting to feel the isolation. Anyway, I finished up with the lock and turned back to my truck. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a cloud of dust, drifting across the headlights in the distance. I thought it was odd, because there hadn't been anyone else on these roads. I was the only one out here, but this wasn't a light dusting like you'd get from a breeze. This was like a car had just sped past me, kicking up all that gravel. I hadn't heard any engine noise, no headlights flashing, nothing. The road was supposed to be closed, locked up tight. I froze for a second, trying to figure out if I'd missed something. Had someone snuck past me while I was locking the gate? I quickly turned off my truck and got out, heart starting to race. I walked down the gravel road in the direction of the dust cloud, trying to see if I could figure out what had just happened. But there were no tire tracks, nothing. It was like the dust had just materialized out of thin air. It made no sense. That feeling of unease was creeping up on me, something I couldn't shake. I had to know what had caused it, what was out here. So, I kept walking, looking down at the gravel for any sign of disturbance, any clue that might explain what I'd seen. That's when I saw the truck. It was old, the kind of thing that looked like it had been sitting in the same spot for years, rusted, with peeling paint and weeds growing around the tires. It was parked off to the side, almost hidden by the trees. The thing that struck me as odd wasn't just that it was here. It was the fact that I hadn't seen it when I drove past earlier. The truck had been there for a while, but no one was around it. There were no people. The windows were fogged up, the truck so still it seemed like it was part of the scenery. It was completely out of place. My gut told me something wasn't right. I didn't know what exactly, but I didn't want to hang around to find out. I turned around, heading back toward my truck, thinking maybe it was just some junk left out here by the park maintenance crew. But that's when I saw it. Hanging from one of the trees off to the side of the road was a body. I can still picture it clearly in my mind, and the thought of it still makes my stomach twist. It was suspended by a rope, swaying slightly in the breeze. The figure was barely recognizable as human. The body was so thin it almost looked like it had been starved, and the skin was this awful ashen blue color, like it had been hanging there for days, maybe longer. The smell hit me almost immediately, a sharp, putrid stench of decay that nearly made me gag. It was the kind of smell you associate with death, with something that's been left to rot for too long. I stood there for a few seconds, just staring at it, trying to process what I was seeing. I had no idea how someone had managed to hang themselves out here, in the middle of nowhere, with no one around to hear it happen. But there it was. The body was so still, so lifeless, that it didn't feel real. It felt like something out of a nightmare. I snapped out of my daze and rushed to my truck, fumbling with my keys to get inside. I didn't know what to do. I knew I had to call the police, but the whole situation was so bizarre, so surreal, that I wasn't sure I was seeing it right. I kept thinking maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had seen was real, and I wasn't about to wait around to figure out why it was hanging there, or what had led to it. I managed to get the phone out of my pocket, hands shaking as I dialed 911. I tried to explain the situation as clearly as I could, but the words didn't feel like they were coming out right. I kept thinking about that body, that horrible smell. The operator assured me that help would be on the way, but I couldn't bring myself to look back. I couldn't stay there a second longer. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, and by then, I was standing by my truck, just waiting for them to confirm what I'd seen. I could still smell it in the air, and my stomach felt like it had been tied in knots. The officers didn't say much when they arrived, just went straight to the scene and started their investigation. One of them came back and said they'd called for a coroner. The body had been there for a while. It was clear that whoever had hung themselves hadn't been found until now. There was no identification, no family or friends coming forward to claim the body. They said he had been alone when it happened. No signs of struggle, no indication that it had been anything other than a suicide. But there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. I had been on these roads for years, and I knew them better than the back of my hand. I had driven past that spot not even an hour before, and I didn't see anything, not even a flicker of movement. So how had I missed the body? How had I missed that truck? It felt like everything had been placed there for me to find, and I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched, of being part of something I couldn't understand. That night, I went home, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept replaying the image of the body, the smell, and the truck. I kept wondering who that person was, and why they'd chosen to end their life in that remote part of the park. I kept thinking about how it didn't make sense, how something felt off, even though I couldn't put my finger on what exactly it was. Over the next few weeks, word started to get around about what happened that night. People from the town were talking about the body, and some even claimed to have seen the man walking around the area. Some of the locals said they had seen him walking down that same road late at night, looking like he was still alive. It didn't make sense, but when you live in a small town like this, you hear a lot of strange stories. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed about that road, that part of the park. I didn't go back to that section for a while, but eventually I had to. It was part of the job. I had to lock the gates again, drive those same roads, but every time I did, my stomach would tighten. There was something different about that place now. The air felt heavier, the silence felt more oppressive, and I couldn't escape the feeling that something, was watching me as I drove past. No one had ever found out who the man was. No family came forward, and the police didn't have any leads. He was just another unknown soul lost to the world, forgotten. And that road, it didn't feel like just another stretch of gravel anymore. It felt like something else, something darker, something that belonged to that man and the tragedy he'd left behind. And to this day, whenever I drive past that spot, I can't shake the feeling that there's something waiting out there in the dark, something that shouldn't be, something that will always be tied to that place. It was a warm, sticky July night when I got put on the graveyard shift for the pay period. I work as a park ranger at an old military base turned public park, and while it's a beautiful place during the day, the nights are something else. The park is full of history, with old forts, crumbling brick buildings, and the iconic lighthouse that still stands tall on the coast. The place has its share of visitors, but after dark, it's all quiet. It's not a bad job. Get paid to keep an eye on things, make sure no one's trespassing, and enjoy the solitude. The only problem is the long, quiet stretches with nothing to do but kill time, which is why I ended up on that damn Pokemon Go grind during the graveyard shift. That night, I was driving around the old fort, barely anyone out there at 2 a.m. except for the occasional raccoon or deer. I had just finished changing a few of the gyms to Team Mystic when I noticed something odd. The lighthouse, which was supposed to be completely dark by that time, had a light on in the second floor. The visitor center, formerly the lighthouse keeper's quarters, was next door, so I figured one of the interpretive rangers might have forgotten to turn the light off when they closed up. It wasn't the first time something like that happened. I'm used to being the one stuck doing the late-night checkups, so I figured I'd head in, turn it off, and get on with my shift. The building wasn't locked up tight, like it should have been, and I slipped inside, flicking on my flashlight as I moved through the building. The floor creaked under my boots as I walked through the main room. It wasn't a big building, just a couple of rooms, but it felt a lot bigger when you were there at night. The old furniture, the worn wooden floors, the smell of dust in the air. It all added to the feeling that the place was still holding onto its past. The walls, lined with historical displays and old artifacts, looked different at night. The dull light from the flashlight threw strange shadows across everything, and it felt like there was 1,000 little creaks and groans all around me. The stairs leading up to the second floor creaked as I walked up. The light from the second floor was casting a soft glow through the dusty window at the top of the stairs. I figured it was the same one I'd seen from outside, but the fact that it was still on after hours bugged me. The building wasn't used much after hours, and everyone had already clocked out. I reached the top of the stairs, pushed open the door, and stepped into the old quarters. The room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that starts to feel heavy, like the air itself is waiting for something. The light in the room flickered a little, and I walked over to the switch and turned it off. It felt good to know that I had done the responsible thing, but the feeling in my gut was telling me to leave. I didn't. Instead, I took a few steps toward the window, looked out at the empty parking lot below, and checked my phone. A few more gyms were under Team Mystic control, but there was something nagging at the back of my mind. I turned to leave the room but froze in place when I heard it. A soft shuffling noise, followed by a faint rustling. It wasn't just the old building settling. It was something else, something moving. My heart thudded in my chest as I tried to calm myself. "It's probably just an animal," I whispered under my breath. There were raccoons in the area. Maybe one had gotten into the attic or something. It made sense, at least to my logical mind. I turned and stepped toward the door when I heard it again, this time louder. Footsteps, soft, deliberate steps coming closer. My flashlight flickered, and the beam of light seemed to tremble as I shone it toward the source of the sound. There was nothing there, just shadows. I told myself it was probably just my nerves playing tricks on me. I had been up for hours, and it was well past the point where the fatigue was starting to get to me. But something about it felt wrong. I quickly turned and left the second floor room. My hand was already on the doorknob, ready to exit when a voice in my head told me to check the window one more time. For whatever reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I went back to the window, peered out into the darkness of the fort, and froze. The light in the second floor room was back on. It had been off when I left the room, I knew that for sure. But now it was on again. My stomach twisted into a knot. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine, but it didn't help. Then, something moved across the window. It was just a quick flash, but I saw it. A shadow. Tall. Thin. I couldn't make out the details, but my mind immediately thought human. My blood ran cold, and for a split second, I thought about going back in and checking it out. But no, that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't some ghost hunter. I was a park ranger, and that building was supposed to be locked up. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. It was as if the air itself had thickened around me, heavy and dense, holding me in place. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else in that building, someone or something that shouldn't have been there. I backed away from the window, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The shadow behind the window was still moving, as if pacing or shifting. It was so quick, so unnatural, it didn't look like a normal person. It didn't even look like it was walking. It was more like it was gliding. My breath quickened, my heart pounded louder, and I swear the whole place felt like it was closing in on me. I turned and made a run for the door. I didn't stop to look back. The door slammed behind me as I ran out into the parking lot, the cold air hitting my face. I didn't care if I looked crazy. My brain was screaming at me to get out of there, and I was not about to ignore that. I rushed to my car, started it up, and peeled out of the parking lot, not daring to glance in the rearview mirror. The only thing I could think about was getting out of there. The whole building, hell, the whole park, felt wrong now. The quiet, the shadows, the light. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more I felt like I was just digging myself deeper into a hole. What was I supposed to think? The light had turned back on after I turned it off. There was movement inside. I had heard footsteps, seen something I couldn't explain. I wasn't some rookie ranger who'd get spooked by a noise in an old building, but that was different. The next day, I went back to the building. The light was off, the building locked up tight. I checked the inside again, hoping to find some kind of logical explanation, but there was nothing. No sign of any animals, no evidence that anyone had been in there. It was just empty, the same dusty old place it had always been. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I had let the darkness get to me. I don't know, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there, something that wasn't supposed to be. I checked all the lights, all the rooms, but the unease stayed with me. The feeling that something was off, lurking just out of sight. I never went back to that building at night again. And when my shift ended, I made sure I wasn't anywhere near it after hours. I'm not saying I saw a ghost or anything like that. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But there's something about that place that gets under your skin. Something that tells you to stay away.